All right, it is, oh, it's week 4. Did I say week 3 in my intro? Anyway, it's week 4. It is, that's right, I stay a week ahead. It's winter 2021, it's Tuesday, it's week 4. We're going to talk about adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, today, and get into the weeds a little bit on that, plus some other stuff. Now, I've already done this, but let's, if people are watching on YouTube, it never hurts to go over this stuff again. So, and we're warming up. Next week we'll be talking about a big one, Addisons disease. So let's go over this stuff. Remember the adrenal gland. I'm not going to go over this too much because I've went over it so much already. But there's a capsule, there's a cortex, which is from here to here, and then there's the medulla, which we've already talked about quite a bit. It sits on top of the kidney, of course, is where the adrenal gland lives. Here's a real picture. There's the adrenal gland. Never really saw it that good in anatomy. It's kind of a crumbly, delicate tissue, like the pancreas. It is the key to life, right? You have to have an adrenal gland or you'll die because of cortisol. You have to have cortisol and aldosterone. Failure of it to release its, and they're called collectively the adrenal steroid hormones, is called adrenal cortical insufficiency, or there's two types, or adrenal insufficiency. So primary and a secondary, which we'll get into. Addison's disease is primary adrenal insufficiency. We'll get into that next time, though. There are 3 subdivisions, as we know this already. Glomerulosa, remember the acronym GFR? Glomerulosa cells, fasciculata cells, reticularis cells live in these zones. And yeah. This one kind of functions on its own, the zona glomerulosa. Remember that's stimulated by the little Tasmanian devil. Angiotensin II is one of those. That's the main stimulator of that zone to release aldosterone. And then we know that fasciculata and reticularis, ACTH, that is the one that triggers the release of these juices, namely cortisol from fasciculata cells, DHEA from reticular cells. Right, and here's just a review slide, because you could see maybe they won't say aldosterone on the boards. Maybe they'll say mineralocorticoids. So you have to know that the chief mineralocorticoid is aldosterone. What's the chief glucocorticoid? Cortisol. And what's the chief adrenal androgen? DHEA. So make sure you know those things. Mineralocorticoids are super important. Again, we've talked about aldosterone a lot already. They maintain the sodium-potassium balance. Aldosterone is the king. There is another one called deoxycorticosterone, which is just as potent, but there's not as much of it secreted compared to aldosterone. And of course, they come from glomerulosa cells in the zona glomerulosa. Glucocorticoids we haven't talked about as much, but that's where we're headed. Cortisol is the big one, but corticosterone is also produced by fasciculata cells, and it's not really as important. It has functions. We're not really going to worry. It's not clinically as important, but it is a glucocorticoid nevertheless. And the job of these hormones is to maintain carbohydrate reserves. So to keep sugar in your blood, right? Your brain, red blood cells, you need sugar all the time. You have a tiger jump out of the bushes and scare you to death. A major stressor will cause the adrenal gland to kick into gear and start secreting cortisol like crazy. So very important. Let's see, what else? We also talked about how glucocorticoids, cortisol shuts off magnocellular neurons, right? It regulates ADH secretion, so that's another important function of glucocorticoids. And yeah, they come from fasciculata cells of the zona fasciculata. Adrenal androgens we haven't touched on much yet. DHEA, that's dehydroepiandrosterone. is the main one. It can be converted quickly into the same dehydroepiandrosterone sulfate, which has a little different look. And it can also be converted lickety split into androstenedione. Androstenedione is how I always learned it. It's also pronounced androstenedione. Androstenedione. I just learned it androstenedione, so that's just the way I say it. But that's another pronunciation. These are not essential for life, so a lot of the endocrinology books don't look at them that much, but we will talk about them. They come from the zota reticularis cells. Oh, I do love this slide. I keep coming back to this, right? And we reviewed this before, but cholesterol is the key model. We saw how it goes in and out of the mitochondria. But the point here is, again, these enzymes, cholesterol demylase is important. The first step is cholesterol into pregnenolone. Pregnenolone can go different ways. It can go over here to make 17-alpha hydroxypregnenolone, which is then turned into the key molecule DHEA. And DHEA can make both testosterone by converting it. Well, if you're going to make the gonadal steroids, if you will, you have to first make androstenedione, and then you can convert that into testosterone. Or if you're female, you can convert that into estrone, which is, these are the estrogens: estrone, estradiol, estratrione. So these are the estrogens here. So androstenedione is an important molecule as well. And I think that's all. And then, of course, not to forget our 21-hydroxylase, because we will talk about 21-hydroxylase deficiency. And the key is here that aldosterone and cortisol will be underproduced, but DHEA will not be affected. What triggers the release of the adrenal steroids? Well, that would be ACTH for one. And well, angiotensin 2 triggers the release of the mineralocorticoids, but what triggers the release of the steroids? We know this already. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, triggers both the glucocorticoids and the adrenal androgens. And also remember, it can stimulate the release of a little bit of mineralocorticoids. It's not super important, but it does happen. Okay, so now let's get into ACTH. So again, it's adrenocorticotropic, adrenocorticotropic hormone. There are some AKAs you need to watch out for. Corticotropin, which is similar to the corticotropic. Adrenocorticotropin without the, isn't that the same? Adrenocorticotropin. Oh, I see. It's just in instead of ic. Yeah, so those are all AKAs. It is a member of the corticotrope family, also called the adrenocorticotropin family. It is secreted from corticotropic cells. That might be a new one for you. Those are very important. Those are the cells in the anterior pituitary that actually release the precursor, the prohormone of ACTH, which is POMC. POMC, as we will see. So it's the only member of the corticotropic family that has an undisputed physiological role. There are other corticotropins. This is the one we know what this one does. And it stimulates the glucocorticoids and adrenal androgens, the release of these. And it causes a tiny bit of aldosterone release. There are the other corticotropins. These are the melanocyte stimulating hormones. So the role of these MSHs are a little more controversial compared to ACTH. There are 3 of them. There's an alpha, beta, and gamma melanocyte stimulating hormone. The only one we're going to worry about is the first one, the alpha melanocyte, the alpha MSH. That's the one that if you have too much ACTH around, your skin can start turning brown and blotchy, which we will be looking at next week. What does it do? For like the 10th time, it stimulates mainly zona fasciculata and zona reticularis cells to release their hormones, and we don't need to go through that again. I could probably pull that slide out. These are my teaching slides, right? So I don't give you bullet points. I found you guys don't like that. I never liked that when I was in school. In graduate school, there's no reason to be taking furious notes, in my opinion. It's better to just have the material and study it. ACTH stimulates the zona glomerulosa a little bit. We know that. I got to weed some of these slides out. Yep, so how do you make ACTH and MSH? So they're made by the corticotroph cells. We just said that, and anterior pituitary, but who stimulates them? So there's another important member that you hopefully know, but we haven't talked about yet, and that's CRH. That's corticotropin, not ick. Corticotropin releasing hormone. And maybe we have talked about it a little bit. That one is made by the paraventricular, or made in the paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus by parvocellular neurons. You need to know those two. Paraventricular, the PPs. Paraventricular nuclei, parvocellular neurons are the key there. The parvocellular neurons also make, I think we have talked about this before, antidiuretic hormone. Goodman calls it, I like this, antidiuretic ADH-p, meaning it comes from parvocellular neurons, because we've talked a lot about ADH-m from the magnocellular neurons. Well, this is ADH that's made by the parvocellular neurons, and it can go down and stimulate corticotrope cells as well. And to have full power release of ACTH, you need these parvocellular neurons that make ADH working full power as well. These parvocellular neurons also make thyrotropin releasing hormone, TRH, which is another important one which we won't get into today. So specifically, the CRH and the ADH travel to the anterior pituitary via the hypothesio portal system, or sometimes just called the portal system. Remember, they are not, the parvocellular neurons have short little stubby axons, and they don't go all the way to the anterior pituitary, so it relies on a kind of a microcirculation, if you will, to take it down to the corticotroph cells. Specifically, they have receptors on the corticotroph cells called CRH-R1 receptors, and that's what binds the corticotropin releasing hormone. The results of binding to the corticotroph cells via CRH1 and via ADH-p, if you will, do the same thing. It stimulates not directly the release of ACTH, but there is a prohormone that's released, and it's confusingly, it's not called prohormone ACTH, or prohormone adrenocorticotropic hormone. It's called prohormone POMC, and that is converted into ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Okay, so you guys usually don't know that. So it does, so technically the corticotroph cells, technically the anterior pituitary, the cells that make ACTH, they don't flat out release ACTH, they release a form of it. The tail needs to be chopped off, and POMC is pro-opiomelanocortin. Pro-opiomelanocortin is what's released. Right, and remember the hypothesio portal system. There's the stubby little Well, so this is the paraventricular nuclei, which would be right here. And here are some parvocellular neurons. And the axons are very short and stubby. And they dump into this, in the median eminence, they dump into this little microcirculation here. Part of the hypothesio portal system, and they come down here to the corticotroph cells that drew them in pink. And those are the ones that release POMC. Alright, so that's pretty much the story. And again, remember the magnocellular neurons have those long axons, and they flat out, they make their ADH, or ADH-m, if you will. And it goes all the way down. Okay, so anything more about POMC? Who really makes ACTH? There's an enzyme called prohormone convertase 1, because it converts a prohormone into a hormone. I guess that's where that came from. That's POMC1. Lives in the anterior pituitary. There's cells that make it we won't get into. It's also in the skin. There's a similar enzyme that lives in the dermis and in the epidermis, and can be produced by the basal cells, actually, in the stratum basale, which is called prohormone convertase 2, very similar enzyme. And it's a finicky enzyme, so the normal amount of ACTH floating around your blood won't set it off. But if you have a ton of ACTH that's floating around your bloodstream, like in Addison's disease, it can start to wake up and grab some of this ACTH, and it can convert it into alpha MSH, and that is a melanocyte stimulating hormone. Remember, melanocytes are those little octopus-like looking things that live in the stratum basale. Well, they don't look like, well, I guess they could look like that. So there's the melanocyte stimulating hormone. MSH binds to that, stimulates it, and it produces melanin like crazy and injects all the adjacent carotenocytes with this melanin. So they get really dark in areas. So you get this blotchy tan color on your body. So yeah, so Addison's patients can have a tan, not like a go to the beach tan usually. It's kind of a blotchy tan. There is a rare cause of, probably won't ask you this, not in any of the board books, but there is a rare cause of adrenal insufficiency where you can have a mutation in PC1. That's not a good thing, because if you have a mutation, you can't make ACTH, and therefore you will have adrenal insufficiency. Basically, you won't have Addison's disease, you'll have secondary adrenal insufficiency, which is not good, right? Because you can't make cortisol and you can't make DHEA. DHEA is not the big deal, but you got to have cortisone to be alive. So here's a great chart, kind of a review, and the PMC story, or the PC story, is even deeper. I mean, if you really want to go into the weeds, parvocellular neurons make ADH-p and CRH. They both stimulate corticotroph cells in the anterior pituitary to make POMC. POMC is acted on twice. It's converted by PC1 into pro-ACTH, and then it's acted on again by the same enzyme to make ACTH and other molecules we won't get into. ACTH goes, and it of course binds to the adrenal gland here to make DHEA. I don't need to write that, do I? DHEA, and to release cortisol. But it also, if enough of it accumulates, PC2 can work on it in the skin and make alpha MSH, which stimulates the melanocytes to produce melanin and color the skin, give you a blotchy color. And you can see the other pathways. There's more to the story, but we're already deep enough into the weeds, we won't even worry about that. And again, ADH also stimulates corticotroph cells. I like this ADH-p that Goodman uses. But yeah, parvocellular neurons in the paraventricular nuclei also secrete a form of ADH that doesn't have anything to do with going to principal cells. It travels to the anterior pituitary hand in hand with CRH, binds to corticotroph cells, and it weakly enhances the effects. It's kind of like the effects of ACTH on the zona glomerulosa. It helps release aldosterone, but it's clinically not important. But for full power release, you need both of these. You need CRH, or you need ADH binding to corticotroph cells this week. But we will come back to this when we talk about stress, because this is one of the culprits with stress, is this ADH-p, as we will see very shortly. Some fun facts about corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH. There are other neurons that release this in the CNS, in the brain, and we don't know the functions. So there's more to this CRH than just going down and stimulating the release of POMC, ACTH. It's also involved in pregnancy, which we won't get into. So there, in the placenta also grows these type of neurons and releases it. So it's much more complicated than just stimulating the release of POMC. What about regulation? So we've kind of talked about this already, but it is double the release of cortisol. It's double regulated. Corticotropin is shut off by cortisol, and cortisol, as we've said already a couple times, it will bind to parvocellular neurons and block their function. And it also binds to corticotroph cells and blocks their function. Where's the picture? Here's the picture. So cortisol, if you're over-secreting cortisol, we have a beautiful double negative feedback system where the cortisol goes up, binds to parvocellular neurons, and stops them from working. So no CRH. I could have put ADH in here as well. This kind of lame pointer thing here with the native PowerPoint 2016. I wish they had a better drawer. The other one is so small you can't see it, and this one's like ridiculous. Anyway, it shuts down the parvocellular neurons, and if that ain't enough, it also binds directly to the corticotroph cells. So if you have some mutation for the receptor on parvocellular neurons where cortisol can't work here, that's okay, because we can still turn it off at the corticotroph cells as well. So it's a double negative feedback system. Make sure you understand that. And that is everything that I just said. Let's see. Cortisol also binds to glucocorticoid receptors on corticotroph cells and inhibits them as well. We already said that. All right, stress. This is always a big one. I think you know a little bit about this already. It's a well-known phenomenon that the more stress you have, you start to overproduce cortisol, is the problem. So what's the deal with that? And cortisol, as we'll talk about next week, it ain't good to have too much of that around. It can damage your protein, can damage your heart, and it's not a good way to lose weight. You will lose weight, but it's not a good way to lose weight. So chronic social stress, it doesn't have to be social either. It can be physical. It could be broken femur. It could be other types of stress. But it increases the release of both. It overstimulates parvocellular neurons to do their thing, which is to release CRH and ADH-p. And of course, those two will overstimulate corticotroph cells and release too much, cause the overproduction of ACTH, which will go down, bind to the zona fasciculata cells, and overproduce cortisol. And that's the problem with this thing. In fact, people with chronic stress, they've done studies, and the corticotroph cells actually grow more receptors for ADH-p. So ADH, that's released from parvocellular neurons, we're calling ADH-p. That's more, it seems the research says that's more involved in causing the stress response because it grows more receptors, so it binds more easily to the corticotroph cells. And yeah, and you can see this in people with prolonged chronic stress. It causes hypertrophy of the adrenal cortex in 2 weeks. When you have too much ACTH around, the adrenal cortex can thicken really, really fast. And that's from the overbombardment with ACTH. Cortisol also becomes more sensitive to ACTH as well. So kind of like practice makes perfect. If you're used, same thing with chronic pain. People who are bombarded with chronic pain over and over and over again, it's not a good thing for the brain. The brain gets good at feeling it, practicing it, and it can go on to linger for a long, long time. ACTH is the only hormone known to stimulate the synthesis of the adrenal androgens. Yes, we know that. Remember the adrenal androgens. Boy, there's a lot of redundancy in this. I could probably cut this way back. But remember the adrenal androgens, ADH or DHEA. We already said this. Androstenedione. Some more fun facts about the adrenal androgens. Remember, not the adrenal steroids. Be careful of that. Adrenal steroids are all of them, right? That's aldosterone, cortisol, and DHEA. Adrenal androgens are just the ones that come out of the zona reticularis. So yep, in women, these are the major androgens in women. And how do you make testosterone in a woman? Well, you take DHEA, convert it to androstenedione. That can be converted into to estrone, and which can be converted into the other estrogens. And the testosterone women comes from androstenedione as well, or DHEA. Women don't have testes, so how do they get their testosterone? This is how they make their testosterone. We looked at this already. They're secreted by the zona reticularis. Yeah, we've said that like a million times. The ovary can also make some. So about 20% of DHE, it's not just the zona reticularis. So almost a quarter, or a fifth, I guess, of the DHEA is made by the ovaries. And after menopause, you get a drop. That's part of the problem with osteoporosis. You get a drop in the androgens, and that can thin out the bones a little bit. It's also a role in fetal development. We've had enough of that in endocrinology. So androstenedione, it's interesting. That's not only made in the adrenal cortex, it's also made in the gonads. So the testes and the ovaries can both make androstenedione. So that's interesting. In females, that is 50% of the testosterone supply comes from androstenedione, which is made in the ovaries. It's also used by cheating athletes in a very complex manner. Androstenedione, it quickly can make huge amounts of testosterone. I used to talk about epitestosterone and the ratio, so let's just leave it at that. If you inject it, it very quickly makes huge amounts of testosterone. So athletes who have come off the main anabolic steroids, because they have to beat the test, right? So they come off maybe a month before they can train with the steroid. But then they have to come off because those oil-based testosterones take about a month to clear from the body. And so what do they use? They need a fast-acting steroid to keep their testosterone levels high, or fast-acting way to keep their testosterone levels high. How do they do that? Well, they can inject androstenedione is one way that they can do that, because that clears really, really fast from the body as well. Anyway, so don't cheat. I mean, I'm just letting you know how they do it, and that's probably, there's probably a million ways to cheat. In females, it can be a problem if there is an overproduction of the adrenal androgens, the DHEA and company. In Cushing syndrome, females can start developing, well, if they make too much testosterone from that DHEA, they can start developing male characteristics, and that's called masculinization or virilation. And so their breasts shrink, their voice gets really deep. They get hypertrichosis, which is hairy all over. They get beards, and so that is a problem in Cushing syndrome as well. And we said this already. A common problem is 21-hydroxylase deficiency, and it's not going to affect these because we already went through this again, so I'm not going to go through that again. But 21-hydroxylase, that enzyme is needed to make cortisol, aldosterone. I guess I am going through it again. And there's no 21-hydroxylase. You just need CYP17 to basically make DHEA. What else does DHEA do? So it's responsible for pubic hair and axillary hair growth during the waking up, during anarchy, not anarchy, and andrenarchy. I can never say that. Andrenarchy. I always want to think anarchy, but no, it's like adrenal anarchy. That's when 12 years old or so you start changing. You become a man and a woman. And so right before puberty, the zona reticularis, and a child's zona reticularis is not active, it's sleeping. Those reticular cells are sleeping. But around 12 years old or so, they wake up and they start making the adrenal androgens, and those are responsible for growing axillary hair and pubic hair. They also cause body odor, which we won't get into. They also cause sebaceous glands to start producing way too much sebum, which can clog the pores of your skin. And bacteria love, this is like candy to them. This is like whatever your favorite candy is, like peanut M&Ms. Oh, those are delicious. So they eat this and they grow, and they can clog the hair pore. And you got yourself a beaver dam, and they breed, and your body sees them and attacks them, and you get an infection, and you got yourself a zit. And we'll talk about open and closed comedones a little bit in 7th quarter. ACTH absence. So if you remove the pituitary, or there's a disease in the pituitary, that leads to a decrease in ACTH. I mean, that's the only thing that stimulates the release of cortisol, so you're in big trouble. And plus you lose the adrenal androgens, which is not that big of a deal, but it's this one you can't live with. You have to take replacement tablets for that. And you can always see when someone has lost ACTH because the zona fasciculata reticularis atrophy, histologically speaking. And that's, I mean, I've just described secondary adrenal insufficiency, so that's where we're headed next week. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See y'all later.